Welcome to this presentation titled The 5 Myths to Preparing a DD Form 1354. A DD Form 1354 is titled The Transfer and Acceptance of DoD Real Property. My name is Stan Childs and I'm with STEM International. Here is a list of the 5 myths that I'm going to talk about. Number 1, the DoD 1354 is only the DD 1354 is only 2 pages long. That's not true. Number 2, it's easy to prepare, anyone can do it. That's not true either. You can learn how to do it, and some may say it is then easy, but initially you just can't step up and do it. Number 3, prepare the 1354 after the project is completed. That's been done numerous times, but that is not the appropriate way to do it. We'll talk more about that. Number 4, there's a specific list of supporting documentation required. Again, that's not a true statement. And the last one is definitely not true. Number 5, cost data is easy to collect. Again, I've never had anyone say that. Number 1, the DD 1354 is only 2 pages long. First bullet there talks about the form itself is only 2 pages, which is a correct statement. But the complete 1354 includes much more than just a 2-page form. It also includes supporting documentation. So not only do you have to fill the form out, but then you need supporting documentation to validate the data that's on the 1354. So if you say a building is 10,000 square feet, then there needs some sort of supporting documentation that shows where did you get that 10,000 square feet. And that's why the 1354, I'll call it a package, can be up to 50 pages long, as I indicate there on that last bullet. It could be as long as you want it. It all depends on how many facilities you include on that form. And you include too many facilities, then it gets a little too much. So most folks don't make their 1354s 50 pages long, just because that's hard to work with. But it's possible. I've seen them. Myth number 2, it's easy to prepare a 1354 and anyone can do it. Well, I would say that anyone can learn to do it. It's not that difficult, but it is necessary to acquire certain skills in order to be able to prepare the 1354. It also requires multiple organizations, so any one person typically can't prepare the 1354 based on the information they have themselves. It often requires a team of 2 different organizations, and often usually 3 to 4. So the first 2 organizations I have listed are the most important ones: the engineering organization, real property. Like I have listed there in engineering, of course, they're going to be important because if there's a contract associated with these facilities that we're trying to put on the accountable record, then the engineering folks are going to know about the statement of work. They're going to know what's in the contract. They may be managing the construction. The Corps of Engineers may be managing the construction, as well as they have estimated cost for the facilities, which all that is important for a 1354. Real property typically is more versed in the category codes. I put on here CAT codes. That's category codes as to what defines what particular facilities are. And again, that takes some time to learn those. There is a document, CAT code catalog, a spreadsheet that you use to identify all that information. So anybody can look on that, but there's still a requirement to have some skill and some experience in real property to even know what you need to look up on that catalog. The third organization that will be involved is the finance office, because they're the ones that are going to track the actual cost of the facilities, of which is a vital piece of a 1354. And then master planning typically will have the as-built drawings, as well as who knows what other additional information, whether they do GIS out of that office. It's not necessarily a standard process, but they are often also included as part of the team to prepare 1354. So as you can see, it's not easy. It takes more than one person, but if you acquire the experience and skills, you can do it too. Myth number 3, prepare 1354 after the project is complete. That is not the appropriate way to do it, although many organizations do that at this point in time. I don't like that. It's because it ends up being less than actual data. There's a lot of estimating going on, which is normally acceptable, but the best way to do it is as bullet 1 says, for new construction or capital improvement, you should complete a draft 1354 before any dirt is turned. Once the project is contracted, a design is complete, then it's time for the engineers and real property folks to sit down at a table and look and see what the facilities are, the real property facilities that are included in this project, and get those down on a 1354, of which we would call a draft. And so the finance folks, the construction management folks know what facilities they're going to have to start tracking cost against during that project. So they're not blindsided once the project's completed and the person developing the 1354 says, hey, I need cost data on that concrete pad that you installed that generator on. They may say, hey, we installed 20 concrete pads. I can't tell you how much that individual pad is. So that's where your problems start. But if you do plan ahead, prepare a draft before the project is started, you're way better off in the end when bullet number 2, the interim 1354, is required. And that is when the project is substantially complete. So that's basically when it's normally that would be a usable facility. Maybe they're moving in, but maybe all the punch items, the punch list is not complete yet. That you could say the construction isn't absolutely finished, completed, but still the facility is usable. So that's what we call substantially complete, and that's where a point in time where the interim 1354 should be prepared, and it's basically filling out your quantities, your cost to go along with the facilities that you already put on the draft 1354. Now, we fully understand that during construction, sometimes there's modifications in the original design, so you may not end up with all the facilities that you originally had on your draft 1354, and you may include additional facilities that weren't on the draft 1354, and that's okay. The final 1354 should be completed after all the financial data is finalized. So sometimes that could be up to 5 years after the actual project is complete and the user has moved in or has started using that particular facility. So the important thing is that there aren't any claims that the contractor would have or a subcontractor would have against the government in order that money may be paid out or some other way that the financial data could be changed. So like I said, it could be 5 years before the final 1354 is completed. Number 4, there's a specific list of supporting documentation required. I wish that was true. It's not as difficult as it sounds, but there is not a specific list of supporting documentations required. However, there is a cheat sheet. So the list of supporting documents is not always the same for each 1354. But what you'll find are plenty of lists and different documents, guidance documents, and so forth, that list potential supporting documentation that is required. So it's not like there's not any guidance to help work through this. There is. Um, but the best guidance is that second bullet is there's 4 categories of support documentation that must be met for each 1354. So essentially, you have to have supporting documentation that meet each of these 4 criteria here. And that's why I'm saying is depending on the different project or what the facility is, the supporting documentation is not always the same. Evidence of project approval. There's not always the same person in the chain of command at each different Army installation or JMC installation or AMC installation that approves a document. You may have a garrison or approves a project or a real property facility construction or capital improvement. You may have a garrison commander signing off. You may have a DPW signing off. You may have a chief engineer signing off. You might have other different levels of signing and approving a project, and you'll have different forms. There's a DA 4283 that's used sometimes, and other organizations, GOCOs, wouldn't use a 4283 to my knowledge. So they would have their own forms to fill out. But in the end, it needs to meet the intent of the evidence of project approval. Number 2, evidence of obligation on behalf of the government. That's where somebody is signing, that has the approval to obligate the government, whether it's a contracting officer or whoever's signing that contract that can obligate the government, or purchase order um, would come into play on number 2. Number 3, evidence of cost. That will be talked about a little more on the next slide, but there has to be some documentation of the cost on the 1354. If a project or if a facility is $100,000, then where did that $100,000 come from? What different sources were put together in order to come up with that $100,000? Number 4, evidence of project closeout. This is where you prove, you show, you have proof of the project's been completed, the government received what they paid for. It could include pictures, it could include final invoices, that the project has been accepted by the construction manager on behalf of the government, and that will fulfill that number 4 requirement. Number 5, cost data is easy to collect. I've never seen that as a quote from anybody that's done a 1354. It just hasn't happened yet, although it's possible because there's some decent guidance and it can be done, but it is an awful lot of work that typically, up to this point, hasn't been put into the preparation of 1354s. Now, collecting cost data can be very difficult, and it can take a lot of time and a lot of people. So by that fact, it falls into the difficult category because it takes a lot of time and a lot of people, and most of all, cooperation, which I've shown there in bullet number 4. cooperation by all team members, because there are cost numbers coming from many different organizations. And like we talked about with the draft 1354, it requires planning ahead in order that you know what you have to collect cost on. So you can't get to the end of a project and say it cost us $100,000 and you have 20 different facilities that have been included in that project, and you have to figure out what part of the $100,000 each of those 20 facilities includes. So you have to plan ahead and know that if you have 20 facilities on your project, that at the end of the day, you're going to have cost, specific itemized costs for each of those 20 facilities. It involves multiple categories of cost. It's not just the well, I say it on the next bullet, it's not just the bricks and mortar. It's labor cost, it's design cost, it's supervision cost, it's inspection cost, it's management cost. It's a lot of different categories of cost to make up what we will consider as the 1354 cost of that facility, of a building. What That's the cost that you're putting on a 1354. If it's 100,000, somebody shouldn't assume that the materials for that building cost $100,000, because it could be that the materials only cost 75 and all the additional overhead cost of doing business could be another 25,000. So that's normally the biggest challenge of preparing a 1354 is getting the cost accurate. Sometimes it's estimated, but the challenge is getting it as accurate as possible. So that concludes this presentation about the 5 myths in preparing a 1354.